Connor McDavid is probably hockey's best player, but so far he hasn't won a Stanley Cup with Edmonton. What if that changed? What if his prime years were spent on a roster built to win instead of one struggling to keep pace? In today's video, we'll reimagine McDavid's career, place him on 3 different contenders, and ask how both his legacy and the NHL's history might look today. But here's a quick question before we jump in. Which alternate cup run would shock you the most? Colorado, Tampa Bay, or Boston? Be sure to let me know what you think in the comments down below. Because when you match up McDavid's speed and production with the correct supporting cast, the gap between his talent and his team's results only becomes more clear. And that brings us to the real issue. What happens when the fastest skater in the game is stuck on a roster that can't keep up? McDavid versus the Oilers ceiling. Connor McDavid has often looked like the best player on his roster, but Edmonton as a team has struggled to provide consistent playoff support. Individually, he's accomplished nearly everything possible: multiple scoring titles, MVP awards, and highlight moments that define an entire era of hockey. Yet when it comes to playoff success, that brilliance has not consistently pushed the Oilers past the league's top contenders. And Edmonton has had both deep runs and early exits. But the disconnect is clear. While McDavid dominates shift after shift, Edmonton has lacked the balance that championship teams rely on. Beyond him and Leon Draisaitl, depth, scoring, and reliable goaltending have often come up short. Defensive lapses and inconsistent support leave too much heavy lifting for their stars. Without those extra contributions, even McDavid's historic pace hasn't been enough to consistently advance. But what makes this even more sharp is the comparison to other franchise players who have entered the league with similar hype. By contrast, Sidney Crosby quickly had complementary stars in Pittsburgh who developed into a championship core. Wayne Gretzky played alongside Hall of Famers in Edmonton as the dynasty years bloom. McDavid's path has been different, though. For much of his career, he's carried an outsized load without the surrounding balance those other greats enjoyed early. The difference in team construction highlights just how difficult his circumstances have been. And despite that, his playoff production remains staggering. Even in series where Edmonton came up short, his offensive numbers match the kind of output that cements legacies. Night after night, he drove momentum, created chances that shouldn't have existed, and kept his team in games long past when the balance of play tilted against them. But it always comes back to the same question. How much more would that production translate if McDavid skated in a setting where he didn't need to do everything himself? This is where perception becomes as important as performance. Legacies in hockey are judged not only by skills or statistics, but by championship winnings. And without a cup, even dominant players can be framed as unfinished stories. McDavid's narrative often circles around that tension: individual excellence against the backdrop of collective shortcomings. Fans and media alike debate whether his prime years are still being defined more by what he's achieved or by what his team has failed to deliver. Which brings us to the bigger idea. If Edmonton has exposed the limits of leaning too heavily on one superstar, what would change if McDavid had instead been slotted into a group already built to contend? Would his scoring, speed, and playmaking have shifted the balance of power in recent NHL history? That's the what if that we need to explore next. The alternate timeline: McDavid on a contender. Let's shift into the alternate timeline and see how McDavid may have transformed into a true contender. To make this realistic, we'll map out 3 scenarios: Colorado, Tampa Bay, and Boston. Each one gets its own look at how he fits, what challenges defenses would face, and how outcomes would shift. And then we'll pull those ideas together into what it might mean for his overall legacy. We'll begin in Colorado. Their 2022 Stanley Cup run, anchored by Nathan MacKinnon's speed and Cale Makar's dominance on defense, was defined by transition play and wave after wave of pressure. In that system, McDavid's acceleration and ability to turn a simple breakout into a grade A chance would fit seamlessly. Opponents trying to decide whether to assign top matchups to MacKinnon or McDavid would face an impossible choice. That matchup confusion alone could tilt more games in Colorado's favor. Stylistically, McDavid would amplify Colorado's free-flowing attack, but there's a trade-off. Sharing touches with McKinnon might mean slightly fewer opportunities for each individually, and the roster would have to adapt to two players with similar high-tempo styles. Even so, the Avalanche's depth combined with McDavid could easily increase their chances of turning a championship run into the foundation of a long-lasting dynasty. But picture him in Tampa Bay, a very different setup. The Lightning's runs to 3 consecutive finals provide a clear blueprint. Tight structure, elite passing from Nikita Kucherov, Steven Stamkos' shooting, and Victor Hedman's all-around play. Adding McDavid into the mix here creates a suspenseful question. How do you defend against a unit where Kucherov and Stamkos already demand attention, only to see McDavid flying through open ice? Opposing defenses would struggle to decide whether to collapse on him or stick to their existing assignments, and either choice would leave someone open. His fit into Tampa's patient puck possession game would likely mean more controlled zone entries and more space for shooters. The trade-off here would come in roster management. Salary cap reality means adding McDavid would likely force tough choices elsewhere. Still though, if integrated, his explosiveness could extend Tampa's dominance beyond their actual run, making them favorites in almost every postseason bracket. Boston offers a third and very different picture. Where Colorado leans on speed and Tampa on finesse, the Bruins have long prided themselves on structure, responsibility, and grinding their opponents down. Anchored for years by Patrice Bergeron's two-way play and Brad Marchand's two-way scoring, their system excelled at eliminating chances. Add McDavid, and you create a system that attacks from both ends. An airtight structure designed to limit mistakes, paired with a game breaker who doesn't need opponents to make mistakes at all. Stylistically, he could feast whenever Boston shifted gears. Imagine Bergeron neutralizing top lines and then McDavid entering against a second defensive pair already worn down. The obstacle opponents face is brutal. Stay disciplined for 60 minutes or one McDavid shift turns the game. And the trade-off here? He would have to adapt fully into Boston's defensive-first mindset, something that could limit pure offensive flair, but also balance his game in ways that only sharpen his impact in high-stakes moments. Taken together, each scenario shows how context matters. On Colorado, depth and pace would elevate him. On Tampa, structure and creativity maximizes his efficiency. And in Boston, his explosiveness would be layered onto discipline and defense. Any one of these could significantly increase his odds of lifting multiple cups or adding playoff MVP honors, though exactly how many is speculative and should be treated as hypothetical only. Which circles us back to the central tension. These alternate timelines make clear how strongly a player's setting can reshape public perception, and with Connor McDavid, the question isn't simply what he does individually, but how his environment shapes the story that we tell about him. And that raises the next point we have to consider. When it comes to measuring greatness, what matters more? The raw talent that we see in every game, or the championships listed on the resume? Connor McDavid's individual dominance is undeniable. His talent level is already historic, and nothing changes that. But his career also shows how much team context shapes legacies. Championship windows, depth, and structure matter as much as raw skill. And when we imagine him on a true contender, this alternate timeline would likely accelerate debates about where he belongs amongst the greats. So then, here's the challenge. Which of those teams, Colorado, Tampa, or Boston, would have turned McDavid into an all-time champ, and how many cups do you think he would have won? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. And perhaps there's a different team that you could have seen him excelling on. If you enjoy these alternate history hockey breakdowns, be sure to subscribe for more, because no matter how the real story ends, the question of a wasted prime will follow Connor McDavid until he either wins a cup or rewrites the record books. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.